Today I'll be explaining every character from Poppy Playtime Chapter 4, from how we met them to who they are, and the backstories you might have missed. Some characters do return from earlier chapters, so I'll only touch on them briefly unless there's a new development. So hey everybody, I'm Jeeps, and first let's take a look at the Doctor. The Doctor, also known as Harley Sawyer, is the main antagonist slash villain in Chapter 4, and the head scientist of Playtime Co., who created the Bigger Bodies Initiative, the program that created the killer toys we see around the factory. We find ourselves facing him multiple times during the chapter, having to move through challenges or what he calls quote-unquote experiments, eventually confronting him near the end of the chapter, putting his reign of chaos to rest. He is essentially a human-turned-cybernetic organism who is in control of the facility in its entirety, using a device called the Omni-Hand, which only the executives used, the people who controlled the many divisions within Playtime Co. Very similar to the blue, red, green, and purple hands we collect throughout the many chapters, which serve a variety of purposes, the Omni-Hand is basically a superior version, with all of their abilities combined. Back on track, however, Harley Sawyer was the scientist in charge of the initiative who not only proposed the idea, but was responsible for the hundreds of other experiments that took place before the company's downfall, like Huggy Wuggy, Mommy Longlegs, Catnap, and so on so forth. However, though he was a brilliant mind within the company, after many mistakes with experiments like Boxy Boo for example, an experiment we see running around eating employees, or getting rid of them, resulting in incidents that may or may have not killed a great many guests, he was eventually disposed of by the higher-ups, separating his major organs into these little tanks we see in Chapter 4, and his brain, the main control room where we finish him off. As we learn from a VHS tape of the executives talking after one of these incidents, the executives couldn't just outright kill him as he was an important mind within the company. So they chose to do something like this instead, keeping his information but taking away all of his power. Next up we have someone whose backstory is just as mysterious. Not really a single person however, but rather a group of characters, the Nightmare Critters. The Nightmare Critters were introduced prior to Chapter 4 being released and were essentially the polar opposites of the Smiling Critters which we meet in Chapter 3. Characters you may know like Dooughey and Catnap. Though the Nightmare Critters are less known, there were 8 just like the Smiling Critters, which I'll show you on screen right now. If you want to look at them, just pause the video, then continue when you're ready. I made a video about this group of characters before and came to the conclusion that these groups of characters were likely a seasonal variety of the original, something like a Halloween version the company created to get more money. But in Chapter 4, after entering the prison, we find these characters surrounding us under orders of the Doctor, who we spoke about previously. I'm unsure as to how many of these plushies were created, but it's clear that they now swarm the factory, attacking the employees and many other experiments within the prison, being left behind after the Hour of Joy until meeting us in Chapter 4. It's very likely that these plushies that we see of the Nightmare Critters are past experiments that failed. Past experiments that didn't work, unlike Huggy Wuggy or Mommy Longlegs for example, now being under control of characters like the Prototype and the Doctor, which let's be honest is a really terrible fate. But let's shift our focus to another major character introduced in Chapter 4, Posaurus. And while this character had some hype within the community, let's just say this one is going to be really short. And if you've played the game, you know why. Before Chapter 4 of Poppy Playtime dropped, like every other release, there was an ARG, an alternate reality game, filled with hidden lore and teasers. Chapter 4's was known as the Ice Pick ARG, and one of the more cryptic clues was a dinosaur-shaped character with a piano for a mouth. The image was hidden behind a glitched out screen, but after some Photoshop tweaking, fans managed to uncover it. A few months later, a Pianosaurus ad dropped on Mob Entertainment's channel, showcasing the Bigger Bodies version of the toy at the end of the VHS tape. So naturally, there was some hype building. But in Chapter 4, we barely get a chance to know him. While crossing a gap, we fall straight into his enclosure, and within seconds, our friend Dooughey proceeds to absolutely obliterate Pianosaurus, leaving him completely disassembled. Easily one of the fastest introductions and deaths in the entire series, even quicker than Dog Day in Chapter 3. In a prisoner report somewhere in the game, it was discovered that Pianosaurus was experiment 1163. Huggy Wuggy was 1170, so this means Pianosaurus was created just beforehand. I really wish Mob dived into this character more, as there was a lot of potential, but Dooughey obliterating him was pretty cool and funny too, don't get me wrong. However, this brings us on to our next character, which I just mentioned, known as Dooughey. Dooughey the Dough Man, also known as Experiment 1322, is a walking mass of sentient Play-Doh. He's capable of shifting between solid and liquid forms. He can reshape himself into bridges, platforms, or even deadly weapons, adapting to nearly any situation. Unlike most of the bigger bodies, which contain a single soul occupying a toy vessel, Dooughey is powered by 3 separate children: Jack Ayers, Kevin Barnes, and Matthew Hallard. 2 of them were Playtime co-orphans, while the first, Jack, was the victim of a tragic accident during a factory tour. Their presence is symbolized by the swirling trio of arms on Doughy's chest, and a variety of other clues that we see later in the chapter. Each child represents a different emotional core personality. One is serious and logical, another is emotional and angry, and the last one is confused and erratic. These shifts are felt throughout the entire chapter as Doughy's personality constantly changes, especially when we're talking to him and he gets heated. One chilling moment that hints at his fractured identity is in one of the VHS tapes in Chapter 4, where Doughy attacks his own parents, unable to recognize them, most likely mistaking them for Playtime employees due to conflicting souls inside him, and of course, the confusion and anger. We first got a glimpse of Doughy at the end of Chapter 4's reveal trailer, where Dough ominously dripped from the ceiling. Then in the game itself, our real introduction comes when he saves us. Unlike antagonists like the Doctor, Doughy's actually a major ally throughout the chapter. He's the leader of Safe Haven, a refuge for experiments who rebelled against the prototype in order to survive. Doughy recognizes that we're working with Poppy and trusts us to help destroy both the Doctor and the prototype once and for all. But in the end, it all falls apart. Poppy's plan to blow up the facility fails. The prototype outsmarts us, relocating the explosives to Safe Haven, wiping out everyone who took refuge there. Doughy, overwhelmed by rage and grief, snaps, going on a full-blown rampage and attacking anything on sight. We eventually confront him one last time in a tragic final battle, and manage to defeat him using freezing method with nitrogen gas, putting Doughy to rest and closing his chapter for good. Doughy has to be one of the best characters in all of Chapter 4, but this leads us on to a character that definitely stands out in one of the more stranger ways: Yarny. Yarny stands out as one of the most unique characters in Chapter 4. Labeled Experiment 1166, he's a lion-like creature made entirely of multicolored yarn. In one of the early teasers for Poppy Playtime Chapter 4, specifically showcasing the prison environment, Yarny is the final face we see, his mouth splitting open vertically down the middle. It's a deeply unsettling reveal and a major departure from any design we've seen before in the series. In-game, we first encounter Yarny during a tense cat and mouse sequence with the Doctor. He traps us inside an observation room and introduces Yarny, releasing him to slowly track us down throughout the facility. Throughout the chapter, we narrowly escape multiple times, often thanks to Doughy, who creates just enough distraction for us to get away. Eventually, during a final chase, we swing across a pit of fire using a hanging chain. Yarny tries to follow and, well, he falls into the flames, making his tragic and fiery end. Lore-wise, Yarny was originally created in the 1970s as a part of a wildlife conservation campaign. He became so popular that Playtime Co. added him to their main toy line, and later turned him into a bigger body's experiment. The host's body was a child named Quinn Navidson, an orphan from Playcare whose full potential was unnoticed, until Dr. Harley Sawyer, also known as the Doctor, saw something different. Quinn was selected and transformed into Yarny, who developed deep, unwavering loyalty to Sawyer. Over time, he was groomed into a kind of personal bodyguard, a role we clearly see reflected during the events of Chapter 4. Now, before we get to the final character, there are a few familiar faces from previous chapters that make a return in Chapter 4. And while they don't take the spotlight this time, their appearances are still worth mentioning. First up being Poppy. Poppy's been a part of the story since the end of Chapter 1, when we first released her from that glass case. In Chapter 4, we see her again when she and Kissy Missy pull us through a crack in the wall, saving us from the prototype who just so happens to be roaming the halls. Poppy continues to be a major ally throughout the chapter, but this time we learn more about her past, specifically her connection to Doughy and the other members of Safe Haven, including Kissy Missy. She had run away from them in the past and only recently returned. Together, she helps form a plan to destroy the prototype, but just like how I said with Dooughey, that plan fails. And what does Poppy do? She runs again. The audacity. Am I right? We also find a personal tape from her during Dooughey's chase sequence, revealing something huge. Poppy is actually the daughter of Playtime Co.'s founder, Elia Ludwig. Safe to say, she's going to be a key character in the next chapter. Next is Kissy Missy. After the brutal ending of chapter 3, where she was attacked by some unknown force, Kissy returns in chapter 4, and she's clearly been through hell. She's burned, scratched, and nearly missing a limb. By the end of the chapter, she does lose an arm trying to save us as the vent beneath us explodes. She reaches out to catch us, but her injuries are too severe, and our weight tears her arm clean off. After taking a look at her injuries, you have to ask, who or what attacked her, and based off of that, what weapons did they have? By the burn marks, I would have said that they had a flamethrower, and the scratches, it must have been something sharp as well. Many fans speculate that the prototype actually attacked Kissy Missy, and one of his weapons that we haven't seen yet is a flamethrower. So in chapter 5, we might see something similar to this. And finally, Huggy Wuggy. Our character looks out the window and spots someone limping in the distance, then suddenly charging at full speed towards us. It's Huggy Wuggy, covered in visible injuries, clearly from that fall, but still alive and very much in the game. Or he's just an illusion from the red poppy gas, which we know creates hallucinations, but I'll leave that one up to you. And finally, the one we've all been waiting for, the prototype. While he's made small appearances in previous chapters, they've been extremely limited, just glimpses of a clawed hand or those sharp, unsettling fingers. But in chapter 4 we finally see him more, his spidery mechanical legs, first spotted while hiding with Kissy and Poppy. Also known as Experiment 1006, the prototype is the most intelligent and dangerous creation from the Bigger Bodies Initiative. He's the true mastermind behind the chaos and the main villain pulling the strings from the shadows. His influence is everywhere, manipulating key characters like Huggy Wuggy, Catnap, Miss Delight, and even his creator, Harley Sawyer, which we see from tapes found in chapter 4. And just when we think things couldn't get worse, they do. From earlier VHS tapes, we've learned that the prototype has the ability to mimic voices, using this to impersonate different characters. Now with that in mind, I've always felt something was off about Ollie. I mean, a child surviving all this, especially after 10 years, it just never sat right with me. There were other small details too, but in chapter 4's ending, the truth finally comes out. Ollie wasn't real. Or, he was real a long time ago, but isn't anymore. He was the prototype the entire time, and in that moment he reveals himself and betrays everyone. A good few of these characters played major roles in this chapter, like Dooughey and the prototype for example, but the Nightmare Critters for instance, they really didn't make much of an impact this chapter. And for there being 8 of them with their own unique personalities, I thought we would have seen them more. So I'm hoping in chapter 5 we see more related to their bigger body versions, as the Smiling Critters were given bigger body versions as well. So perhaps we'll see something in chapter 5. This was every chapter 4 character explained. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to watch this next one where I explain Dooughey's backstory more thoroughly. And as always, I'm Jeeps, and I'll see you next time.